Like, they're inventing a
They've
stalemate.
constructed a stalemate.
Exactly.
Welcome to Baggage Claim, an unofficial Jet Lag the Game companion podcast. Today, we're unpacking episode 1 of season 14, SnaKe, South Korea. I'm Jaya.
I'm Casey.
And I'm Kira.
Kira, who are you rooting for this season? And is this who you typically root for in a round robin?
I am rooting for Ben. And yes, I think in every season I've been Team Ben. I think that he's going to do really well this season. I think his rat mode energy is going to go really well with SnaKe. We're really rooting for Team Ben right now.
Casey, what about you? I think we know who you root for, but...
Shocker. I'm rooting for Sam, and I am feeling the energy, okay? I know historically Sam has literally never won a new round robin solo season on the first time before, okay? But this is the time. I can feel it in the air. This is his season.
I feel like I usually just root for whoever it would be funniest to win. So, like, in the last tag, I was like, Sam's gotta win because he hasn't won one of these yet.
Yeah.
But this is the first round robin season that all three of us are, like, watching as it airs together.
Yes.
And so, of course, the two of you go so hard on your team, so I have to go so hard for Adam, and so that's where I'm at this season.
And I do think Adam also had some key moments in this episode that I'm sure we'll break down later.
Yes,
but,
yes,
like,
yes.
Adam and Sam, I was really surprised to see them working very well together in this format. It's gonna be interesting.
Well, let's jump into our recap. This season starts with a feeling of, like, a high-tension stalemate almost immediately, where Ben, the snaker, is waiting for the blockers to place a card and give up their location, but the blockers are waiting for Ben to move so that they can find out where he is. Ben psychs himself out really hard out of the high-speed train and waits 44 minutes for a low-speed train to avoid the node at Osong, where he assumes the blockers are. He is correct that the blockers are at Osong Station, but the blockers are incredibly nervous that Ben is actually headed east to the realm of low-speed and low-density lines. The blockers decide to get on the once-every-few-hours eastbound train, but not without a lot of waffling, because Ben would arrive at a southbound node exactly when the eastbound train is supposed to leave. The blockers realize they've made the wrong decision almost immediately on this train when they receive the node notification from Ben about 1 minute after their eastbound train has left the station. Ben, however, doesn't know they screwed this up. So he, worried they're going to catch him at the Jochiwon node, waits 40 minutes in Cheonan for a train that goes south to Iksan the long way, completely unaware that the blockers are also stuck a couple stops away from Jochiwon for the next hour, and he could have absolutely run away on that higher speed line. These waiting periods between trains are unique from other round-robin seasons because neither team really has anything to do. So they wander, and Ben buys banana-flavored Pikachu milk, while the blockers go outside and see fighter jets galore where they are. The hour passes, and the blockers head to Osong to try and intercept Ben, dropping a battle challenge before learning that he's actually taken the slow route to avoid that node. Ben has kind of played himself here, though. With him on the slow route, the blockers are able to get to Iksan before him, drawing and placing a second battle challenge to win a game of Tuho. Adam locks in and beats Ben at Tuho, ending Ben's SnaKe at a respectable 247.8 kilometers. To conclude our recap, I've come up with a title to highlight what I thought was the most important moment of the episode. And you guys might already know what I'm going to say for this. It's, you wouldn't milk a Pikachu. I also would like to give an honorary mention to Snaker. I hardly know her, but we already did that with Timer, so...
It's gotta be said. It simply has to be said. And kind of for a similar reason, I know that this was even already said by, like, the Nebula account posting that the first episode was up, but you gotta say it. Snakes on a train, etc., etc.
I mean, it's perfect.
That's a classic.
I also wanted to put out there, if I'm playing 4D chess and you're playing 4D chess, ...
That's really good.
That is really good.
Well, with that, Kira, I'll hand it to you for our Strat Chat.
Thanks, Jaya. Welcome back to the Strat Chat, our segment where we break down the strategy and gameplay of the episode. We've been hearing for a little while that this is the brainiest season so far, and I think it's safe to say that that's true. There's already so much to keep track of and so much to predict, and I think the strategies this season are going to be intense. But so to get us started, I want to talk a little bit about the blocker strategy. Right from the start, we can see that the blockers game is going to be filled with high highs and low lows. But even ignoring the times when Sam and Adam's gambles didn't pay off, I think their strategy more generally is really interesting. I would characterize their strategy as being centered around forcing Ben to hit a challenge head on, which only really works if they know exactly where Ben is going to be, and they're able to drop their battle challenge or roadblock after Ben has already locked himself into his route headed towards that station. An alternate strategy might have been to use roadblocks and curses to try to deter Ben from going on a certain path, which is what Ben initially thought they were going to do. What do you both think of these two strategies? What are the benefits of trying to drop roadblocks and challenges only on paths where they think Ben will go versus trying to deter the snaker from going on those paths?
We're still learning about how this game is being played. And for me, one of the things I was surprised to learn is that the blockers only get access to new cards when they go to a new node. So I think it looked like Sam and Adam were playing a bit more conservatively here in order to not run the risk of running out of cards and needing to then go to a new node to draw a new card, which I understand that strategy, but I definitely just, my impulse watching this episode would be, well, just start dropping them and really limit the paths that Ben has out of his node and his path. I think that the benefit for me of trying to be proactive and really use that head start to start laying roadblocks and everything down, I'm going to make a chess analogy here because I have started to learn chess. And one of the things that I learned in chess that I think kind of relates here is if you, the player, are unsure about what move you want to make that would be the most optimal, you should put that decision into the other player's hands. Ooh. So here, I think Sam and Adam were really waffling around. Should we drop this battle challenge here? Should we go there? Should we try to set something up? They were really kind of waffling in that indecision. Whereas if they had dropped a challenge or a roadblock in a certain station, then they would be putting that decision back onto Ben. And Ben would then be forced to say, okay, should I go with my plan and run the risk of failing the challenge or the roadblock in that station? Or should I change my plan and go elsewhere?
I really like your take on that, but I do want to add that I think they might have gotten nerfed a little bit by getting a battle challenge immediately, because the nature of a battle challenge is that they have to be there. Yes. So you don't want to play a battle challenge if you're not completely certain that the snaker is going to end up there. If you're starting off on the foot of we need to play this battle challenge and we need to be here, not we can place a roadblock, do that challenge and keep going, then I think they're just going to be moving a lot slower than they otherwise would be. And I think with the speed that they're moving, they could be moving pretty fast, especially in the western side of the country. So they could just be going between nodes decently easily for more and more cards. But I do think that in the eastern side of the country, where there's fewer nodes, the trains are slower, it's going to take you way longer to get between them and get more cards, maybe the strategy that they were actually using would be a lot more beneficial.
I completely agree. And I also think one of these assumptions that I had going into the season that is now maybe proving to not be true is that I thought, based on the game design, that the majority of runs would be ended at a node that the snaker had previously gone. Like, I was expecting the snaker would cut themselves off, hitting their previous path.
Like, crashing would be the most likely way to end a run, not battle challenges or failing.
And I think it's always really cool to see the first episode of a new game format, because we're seeing the players start to figure that out themselves. And I know that they've run simulations and thought a lot about it, but it's not completely accurate until they're playing. And so here, it seemed pretty clear to me that Sam and Adam, at least, were really expecting, okay, Ben's run is going to end because of a battle challenge, essentially. That was what they were banking on, which I thought was a really interesting assumption that definitely guided their approach and their strategy of waiting out where Ben is going to go and making their decisions based on that. And I think it also shaped Ben's strategy of waiting to see where roadblocks would be set up, but then ultimately when he didn't receive notification, just going ahead and trying to make that path.
Yeah, I think they both really played the most patient strategy that they could as a snaker or as a blocker.
Yeah.
It kind of reminded me a little bit of Capture the Flag at times when they, when they had trackers on each other and they were seeing, okay, are you going to move first? Am I going to move first? I think here the snaker and the blockers know that it's more valuable to move once you've received information from the other.
Right.
Yeah, that feeling of a stalemate in the middle of a run.
Or it even reminded me of that part in, I think, Sam's run in Tag 3, where there was also a little bit of that stalemate, where Sam wasn't moving, and so because he didn't move, Ben and Adam, were able to block either path, but as soon as they go down one path, they would leave the other path open. And so it is interesting seeing these stalemates happen.
Well, and I think it's extra interesting, and I know that this is a big part of the game in general, is that predictive decision-making, but they're in a stalemate, but they don't really know where each other are.
Yeah.
Right? They're inventing a stalemate.
They've constructed a stalemate.
Exactly.
Well, on the snaker side of things, there are a couple of pieces of strategy that I want to hear your thoughts on. First, I thought it was really interesting to hear Ben debate the high speed versus low speed lines. So to me, it seems like there are two main considerations. First, high speed lines are clearly the more convenient option for the snaker because it'll take them farther faster, but that means that the blockers are more likely to already be primed to block the high speed line. And second, if the snaker is on a low speed line that's near a high speed line, then the blockers might have an advantage in getting ahead of the snaker because they can take the high speed line. Do you think that there are other considerations between the high and low speed lines? And do you agree with Ben's assessment that the low speed line is safer in general?
I think another part of it, in my mind, is that the high-speed lines are typically higher frequency than the low-speed lines. Mm-hmm. If you're taking a low-speed line, it's going to be harder for the snakers to reach you, but it might be faster for them to get in front of you because there's going to be fewer stops. So it's going to be easier for them to figure out, okay, what's the next stop you're going to be at? I can get there. I have the time to get there.
Which is interesting because unlike a tag season, it's not good for the blockers to just follow directly behind.
Yeah.
So it still feels like if the snaker takes a high-speed line and isn't blocked by anything, then they're sort of in the clear. And the downside is that the blocker probably is trying to block the high-speed lines because they're so powerful.
If the snaker can get ahead of the blockers on a higher speed train, they are going to be able to run away with it for quite a while.
Right.
I have two reactions to the high versus low speed line question, and both of them kind of boil down to, I will be very interested to see this question continue to play out throughout the season. I feel like the first part is, we haven't seen this yet, but I know that one of the blocker options can be laid down not at a station, but along a stretch of...
the curses?
The curses, thank you.
Yeah.
The curses are laid out on a stretch of the line. And so I think that those probably would be more powerful when laid on a high-speed line because you have less options of getting off that line. There are fewer stops along the way.
Speaking of the low-speed lines having more space between the stations, I think which one is better then depends on your confidence that the blockers are close or ahead of you. Because if the low speed lines have more space between stations, but it's easier to get to because you have a lot of time, then it's going to be easier for the blockers to get in front of you, but there's going to be quite a while on that line before you actually get there. So if you're just sort of trying to run out the clock or run as far as you can, but you know you're going to be cut off, then a low speed line might be more optimal because you might cover more mileage.
I completely agree, and I think that that is definitely going to come into play later in the season.
And so I wonder if there's going to be a strategy going forward of placing a roadblock one station before a node to try to get that whole stretch to not count.
I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting plays with the fact that they only save the length once you get to a node.
Yeah. Right. And I think that really didn't come into play here. I mean, especially they were figuring out the game
Yes.
Like, they're not going to be doing weird fuck-ass strategies.
Yes. That relates to what my second observation about the high and low speed lines is. And this is a bit meta, so hear me out.
Okay.
I have been thinking a lot recently about reality TV and game show television as storytelling. And I think here, seeing a new format is really interesting because we're seeing kind of the arc of the story start out in a different spot than in previous seasons. So I think with Tag, for example, we've seen the players get so confident with that system that even on a new map, they know how to play it. And I think here, and listening to the layover episode about episode 1, it's clear that the players were not confident in this first round. I think they all were much more uncertain than typical. And I think that came through in the kind of decision making that was happening and in the waiting periods here. I think there was a lot of uncertainty, and they really let that uncertainty dictate their decisions in a very prediction-based game.
I think you're completely right.
And so I think that the high speed versus the low speed lines, taking that high speed line requires confidence in your strategy. It requires you feeling certain that you're going to be able to get to the next node before the blockers place anything there, or confidence in your guess that the blockers are not anywhere close to that node or that path.
Or confidence in your ability to make it through a roadblock.
Right. Yeah. And I think that there was not that confidence here from either the SnaKe or the blockers. And so my prediction is that this question of the high speed and low speed lines is going to be answered very differently at the end of this season once we've reached more familiarity and confidence in playing the game than at the beginning here. Because I will say, as someone watching this episode, and obviously with all of the information in front of me of where the blockers are, what they're thinking about, obviously more information than Ben had. But if he had taken the high-speed lines,
he would have run away with it.
He would have been much more successful than his run here. And I think that, yes, of course, he's lacking a lot of that information. But what I have seen in previous round-robin seasons is one of the most dangerous qualities of a runner or a hider's strategy is just confidence in their plan.
I completely agree with you. I think as we get farther into the season, the balance of low to high speed lines, there's going to be way more high speed lines as we get later and later.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ooh, I can't wait to come back to this in a U-turn at the end of the season.
Exactly. That was so insightful. Okay, so the last thing I want to discuss about the SnaKe strategy is optionality. We've seen a couple times where Ben has had to make a decision between going to a station that has better, more frequent connections versus going somewhere that's harder to transit through, but also probably harder to block. For example, we saw him rule out the long route south to Sunshine because it would leave him stranded there for 3 hours, which would leave Sam and Adam plenty of time to block him in from all sides, even though there are no high-speed lines around, so it would be virtually impossible for Sam and Adam to block him before he arrived at Sunshine Station. My thought is that it probably feels better psychologically to leave your options open to keep going, but I'm wondering whether it might make sense to go on a guaranteed longer path, even if it means backing yourself into a dead end. But I honestly don't really know. What do you both think about this? Should the SnaKe always be thinking about how to try to keep going and keep options open? Or would it ever be a valid strategy to go into a long dead end? Do you think the strategy will change over the course of the game?
I do think it'll change over the course of the game, because as they get both more confident and learn a bit more about how long the standard run is going to be, they might know when their run is sort of coming to an end, and they should try and extend their mileage as much as possible, regardless of knowing that, like, okay, I'm going to get blocked off by this station, probably.
Yeah.
I think the balance here is that the stations that are better for snaking options are also easier for the blockers to get to, and therefore easier for you to sort of get screwed at.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'm having some thought about saving nodes for later. like, if you have a decently good low frequency or low speed option at the beginning of your run and you don't think they're going to get ahead of you there, then it might honestly be better for SnaKe to do the thing with the low frequency train first and then be able to take those higher frequency, higher speed trains to just sort of zip around once they're in a bit more danger later in the game.
Ooh, that's interesting.
I think that this question of optionality really has to do with the blockers' options as well. I think that the SnaKe keeping their options open also allows for more options as the blockers begin to limit various paths versus kind of committing to one path that might be longer but might lead into a dead end. If the blockers then are able to cut you off, it really limits your ability to get out of that. But I also think here, definitely seeing Ben's strategy of higher frequency versus, maybe harder to block. I think that some of those decisions were not the most optimal, but they still worked out because the blockers didn't know what he was doing, which I feel like is really going to have an impact on this question.
I'm still thinking about your chess analogy. I think the SnaKe keeping their options open could also let the blockers be choosing what route the SnaKe takes.
Exactly.
Which would ultimately be a lot better for the blockers, because if they're like, oh, the SnaKe is going to think this is a really good route, but like we have a secret weird way to get there easily, we're just going to leave that open, let it be the last route that they can take, they're going to take that route, and then we can get there.
Yeah.
That would let the blockers make the decisions for the SnaKe, which I think would ultimately really hurt the SnaKe's run.
Yeah. It is also interesting. I was thinking about how in other round robin seasons, there's not necessarily like as much of a Hail Mary option, where I'm thinking like in tag, we were talking about how it's hard to know who's in the lead until the end. Whereas in hide and seek, there's a constant leaderboard. And so you can say, oh, well, it's possible if someone is 20 minutes or an hour away from getting into first place, do they have the control to just extend their run? And I don't think that's as much the case in a hide and seek, because at a certain point, it's just the place that you chose to hide. Yeah. But it feels like in this game, as we start seeing more and more runs and we start seeing what a good distance is, it feels like maybe later we're going to see people say, well, I only really need 10 more kilometers. I could go to the left and have the option of getting 50 more kilometers, but I could get cut off after 5. Or I could go to the right and I'm going to get a guaranteed 10 and put me in first place, but I'm almost certainly going to end there. And so I wonder if we're going to start seeing more of this mental calculus of like, I can guarantee myself a small win versus I can gamble on making this a clean sweep.
That could be a place where putting roadblocks at non-node stations comes into play.
Oh, totally.
Because your distance only counts when you hit a node.
Oh, yes.
So let's say you have like 5 miles to one node, 10 miles to another node. You're like, okay, I'm going to get to the 10-mile node, even though I know I can get cut off there. That might be when the blockers will go to that 10-mile node, drop something there, but then also continue up the line and put something at a smaller station.
Oh, this is juicy stuff. I'm so excited.
I know.
Okay, well, with that, I will hand things over to Casey.
Thanks, Kira. Welcome back to The Detour, a segment where we propose alternate paths that the teams could have taken and discuss our thoughts on what might have happened. I have 2 alternate scenarios that I want to unpack here. First, what if Ben had gotten on the high-speed train at Chunin instead of waiting for the slow speed? That train would have gone southwest through Jochiwan. So let's play this out. Maybe Sam and Adam could have gotten to Jochiwan in time to play a battle challenge or a roadblock. But if Ben was able to either beat them there or was able to continue through the block, where do you think he would have gone from there? And what would have been the best option for the blockers?
I mean, I do think realistically he totally could have gotten there if he hadn't gotten off his train, because they were all messed up east of Osong at that point. Like, I don't think they could have gotten to Jochiwan because they had an hour to wait for the next train, and he would have gotten there in way less than the time that it took him to get out of Chunin.
And also, it would have been the same sort of situation where they wouldn't have known that he is going to Jochiwan until he arrives there, because they're still not sure if he's going west on the slower route. And so it would have still been their gamble. And so I'm not sure. I think it's still pretty likely that he could get through. I'm wondering whether he could have continued to take that lower speed line down to Daejeon, which then connects to a high speed line, because if he's in Jochiwan, there's no node in between him and Daejeon, which means that there would be no way to predict that he would go that way. And so I would almost predict that Sam and Adam would think he's going to go to Osong. So they would go back to Osong ready for a battle challenge.
Because they would have to go back to Osong regardless.
Right. But in the meantime, Ben could go south to Daejeon and then get on that high-speed line. And then if he's ahead of them on the high-speed line, as we've discussed, that's a really powerful position to be in.
Absolutely.
Looking at it how we were when we were watching the episode, I was like, oh, damn, like if he had just stayed on that train, he could have gotten to the high speed at Daejeon.
If Sam and Adam were really looking at train times and were thinking, well, he should have arrived at Osong by now, they could have beat him there, which could have also been really sticky.
Because Jochiwan to Osong is definitely a much faster route than Jochiwan to Daejeon.
Or consider what might have happened is that Ben may have intentionally not taken the first train to Osong in order to kind of like reverse psychology, say, oh, well, if I didn't arrive at Osong at the time that you thought, then I must have gone south to Daejeon. And so sending the blocker south, but then he cuts east to Osong, and so there could be a lot of like missing a train intentionally, but then taking the next train on that same route. Reverse psychology, reverse psychology.
I also want to take one more detour with you. So in the episode, Ben's run ended in Ixon. I want to know, what would Ben's strategy be if he won the battle challenge and got to keep going? And what would the blockers' best strategy be, knowing that they would now be physically behind Ben?
I mean, I feel like it makes a lot of sense for Ben to start taking the slower lines going south and just being okay with the fact that he'll be blocked eventually. So I personally, and maybe we'll see in future episodes that this is a really bad strategy, but it makes sense in my head after seeing one episode that I feel like he should go south into Sunshin and then
on the low speed, not the high speed to Gwangju Songjong and then to Sunshin.
Oh, now that you mention it, that definitely seems better.
Because that's more mileage than going straight on the low speed from Ixon to Sunshin.
Right.
I would have honestly argued that he should just go to Osong. Because, I mean, based on his route down into Ixon, he wouldn't be crossing over anything going to Osong and then heading south on either of those two lines.
On either the high speed.
On either of the high speeds out of Osong, yeah.
That's probably a better strategy.
Knowing that he's ahead of the blockers, taking a high-speed train, they can't go faster than that. So it's going to be harder for them to get in front of him.
It is interesting because I'm guessing, sort of similar to Capture the Flag, that the blockers should be able to watch him get on a train. And so it wouldn't be strategic for them to get on the same train, but they could physically watch which train he's going on, which would sort of give them an advantage because they'll know what his next node is. And so they can't get ahead of him, but they'll know where he's heading. And so if they see that he's going to Osong, then they could maybe start checking times to see if they can take that slower speed line down into Seodaijin and just try to start cutting him off in that direction.
Oh, yeah, like does that slow speed directly from Ixon to Daejeon through Seodaijin? Does that slow speed get there faster than Ben would be able to on the high speed, taking a more roundabout route? But then on the more roundabout route, he would be getting more miles.
Right. But then I'm even just thinking, like, it makes sense that if Ben were to have gone on the high speed back to Osong, maybe the blockers would say, okay, well, we still want to keep up with him, so we want to take that same line, and then we'll just start getting ahead of him from there. But I just feel like the longer you're on the same line as someone else, the harder it is to eventually block.
Yeah.
Where it almost makes more sense to say, let's just go anywhere else and get lost somewhere, because then at least we have somewhere to go to. Like, you can't get a direct route to a station that you're already at. And so if they just go anywhere else, forfeiting a little bit of distance and a little bit of time for Ben, I just feel like they have to be on a different route in a different part of the map so that they have somewhere to go to.
I would like to posit that we might see some of this play out at the beginning of Sam's run, because they're starting in Ixon.
Totally. I was just about to say, I think it would be really interesting to see whether any of this actually plays out in the beginning of Sam's run. But with all of that speculation and digging deeper, I'm going to pass things off to Jaya for a game.
We were just talking about how Ben's run ended in Ixon with a battle challenge. But that battle challenge was Tuho. And you all know by now how much I love games. But what you might not know is that I was raised playing some ancient games, which I will lovingly blame my anthropologist mother for. But you can only imagine then how excited I was to hear about Tuho, a game that dates back to around the 13th century. So for my game today, I wanted to keep riding this high of ancient games. I am going to tell you about a game, its origin story, and the pieces or components that you need to play. And I want you guys to make up a rule set.
Oh boy.
This is thrilling.
So we'll start with Patoli. This is a board game from the Aztec Empire. It was played by commoners and nobles alike, and it was central to society as one of the most common betting games. To play it, you'll need 5 small red beans, which the game is named after, because Patoli is the Aztec word for bean, a cross-shaped board, like an X, not like the Jesus cross that looks like a T, and a bunch of tokens, and these tokens act as, like, board pieces.
Okay,
It's a betting game.
That's what I was going to say. I'm intrigued by the fact that this is a betting game.
I think there's going to be something with how many of the beans end up in each of the 4 quadrants, where I'm almost imagining, like, playing jacks or something, where you're, like, shaking the beans and you, like, throw it at the board, and something with, like, you're betting how many of the beans are going to end up in the same quarter of the board, but then I don't know what the tokens are for.
So the tokens are the pieces. So then the beans, I wonder if the beans are points. Like, if you get your token to a certain part of the board, then you get a bean, and whoever has the most beans at the end of the game wins. And maybe the betting could be around who wins, but also how many beans they get. That's what I'm gonna guess.
Casey, you're definitely closer than Kira.
Ooh.
But in play, the beans don't act as winnings. The beans are dice. So on your turn, you'll throw your beans or your dice, and you can use whatever you roll to bring tokens onto the board as game pieces, like you do in Sorry. And then on subsequent turns, you'll be moving them across the board towards an exit ramp on the other end. And tokens are safe on some squares, but can be eaten or captured by your opponent if your opponent lands directly onto them with something that they roll. So next up, Mesoamerican ball game.
Love that.
The ancient version of this game doesn't have a name that it's commonly called, but the modern version is called Ulama and is still played by quite a few people in Mesoamerica. It dates back to before 2000 BCE, so it is very old, and the thought is that it originated in the low-lying tropics where the rubber tree lives in modern-day southern Mexico, but it's kind of debated whether it was on the Pacific coast of southern Mexico or the Gulf Coast. This game was played very commonly for a lot of years by a lot of different societies, so there are a ton of different rule sets and a ton of different games that it pretty much is. But it was also really important to a lot of Mesoamerican societies, with a strong association with warriors and ceremony. The games often had a religious significance, leading to the captain of the losing team sometimes being sacrificed to the Aztec or Maya gods. The winners were also given trophies that are commonly found in graves, which when you pair it with some carvings at Maya ball courts, indicate a pretty solid link between this ball game and the underworld. So it had a pretty strong cultural and religious significance. It's played on a court, typically about 60 meters long, closed off between sloping or vertical stone walls on either end and around it. This varies between a ton of courts. One of the courts in Oaxaca is shaped like an eye, and it seems like as time progressed, more and more courts were shaped like eyes.
Like the letter.
Yeah, like the uppercase letter of the I. I will just tell you that the two ends of it are end zones. This is a ball game. The courts can also have stone hoops set up high on the side walls of it, so on the sides of this court. And of course, you need a ball, typically made of rubber, and about 9 pounds. So this is a pretty sturdy rubber ball. How do you play Mesoamerican ball game?
Whoa.
So I've definitely heard of this before, which is just going to make it more embarrassing when I get it wrong. Because I think I've been told explicitly what the rules are in multiple academic classes that I've taken. But I don't remember.
I mean, what I will say to start is that I think that some modern sports should maybe consider a sacrifice if they lose. But I mean, so I'm just gonna walk through my thoughts out loud. I feel like maybe an obvious assumption I have is that this would be maybe similar to basketball because of the shape of like an eye makes me think that there's two sides of the court, and if there are hoops set up, then that makes me think of basketball. But
The hoops are on the sidelines also, not in the end zones.
so that is completely not
Just to tell you, like, physically where they are.
I feel like
Okay.
it's like American football. But maybe there are rules with the passing. But what are the hoops for?
I'm wondering about this ball, the titular ball. Titular ball.
The hoops are also not present on every court. They're a later addition.
Fascinating.
I'm wondering about this ball. Are you bouncing it, or are you rolling it, or are you throwing it? Are you carrying it? Those are just several questions.
I'm going to take a guess and say you're throwing it, even though it's 9 pounds. I bet this is a very dangerous game. I'm putting all my money on the fact that it's a game where you will get injured.
I will tell you that is true.
Okay.
I'm gonna say maybe this is like dodgeball.
Ooh. I think it's more like American football, but frankly, dodgeball sounds scary in this context with a 9-pound ball.
Made of rubber. Boing.
Dodgeball is terrifying. Football is kind of closer. It is like if you took soccer football and made it your hips in the middle of your body instead of being kicked.
Sorry,
So it's like a hip ball game. It's a hip ball game.
People are really limber in the
Sorry, say that one more time.
So, like, you use your hips instead of your feet, but it's soccer. You bonk it with your hips.
To each other?
Yes, to each other.
I'm-
There's 2 to 4 players per team.
Casey's losing it.
So there are, of course, a ton of variations about how to play this game on this court. But most commonly, it's a hip ball, akin to a modern-day soccer, where you're using your hips, or generally just your elbows, knees, thighs, and shoulders, to smack a rubber ball towards the end zone, while the opposing team is doing the same thing with the other end zone.
Did a lot of people die while playing it? Because that's mostly what I remember.
Yes.
I remember it being so violent. Okay.
It's so violent. So next up, I've lumped 2 games together, because they have fairly similar play, and these are Moapahi and Ulumaika. These games both originate in Hawaii, but because there was no written language prior to the 18th century there, it could have come from pretty much any time between the 4th century, when it's thought it was originally settled, and then. For Moapahi, you need a long course of packed dirt and a pahi, which is a 2 to 4 foot long pole with a thick and rounded front, and then a thin tapered tail. Think like club-shaped, but with a slightly thinner tail. Typically carved out of an extremely dense kailua wood. I thought it was neat that they carved them out of a wood that's so dense that it sinks in water.
Wow.
The other game, Ulumaika, uses the same course, the same long course, but you need a disc-shaped stone and sometimes some cue sticks.
There's a lot here that I'm very fascinated by. First of all, I don't even know what the rules are, but it sounds fun. So I want to lock
So
that
true.
in first.
I'm picturing this like discus. Or like some kind of like javelin, where you're at one end of the long course and you're throwing the pole. I'm gonna say you're throwing the pole tapered side first, so it's like cutting through the air. And then maybe because it's packed dirt, it'll like land, like it'll stick into the dirt and still see the distance. Or if it's a disc-shaped stone, I wonder if you're doing that like shot put.
I think it's interesting that this pole or pahi is clubbed at one end, that makes me think that if it were to be thrown, then maybe kind of circling around to gain momentum with the thicker, heavier side of it. But also the rounded front, I think, is interesting because that does not suggest to me necessarily aerodynamics.
Okay, physics.
I don't think a round front goes through air very well. But then the disc-shaped stone and the cue sticks are a similar game, but slightly different, it seems. I guess I'll also guess that they're being thrown.
Very reasonable guesses, but the thing stays typically on the ground. So both sports just require you to either roll or slide your thing for a greater distance than the other guy.
I was thinking about rolling. But I didn't say it.
There's also sometimes a goal set up at the end of this dirt course that you need to either reach or get between two sticks or knock down, resulting in Ulumaika being known as Hawaiian bowling. Finally, we have another game. This is a silly one. It's also from Hawaii, called Hakamoa. There are no tools required for this, so I'm just going to tell you that the American name and English description for it is a standing chicken fight, and let you tell me what you think it is.
I don't know if this is right, but I only have one guess, which is that there are 4 people and 2 people are riding on the other 2 people, either on back or on shoulders, and you're trying to topple the other tower.
That's also what I'm thinking. I hope it's that.
So you are trying to topple someone.
Is that not totally right?
That is not totally right. So you have 2 people competing. They're typically standing inside like some sort of circle marked out on the ground. And they will hold their left leg with their left hand, grab their opponent's right hand with their right hand, and try to wrestle each other either to the ground or out of the circle.
That's awesome. That's awesome, and I'm doing that with both of you the next time I see you.
You're gonna kick my ass, and I can't wait.
If Casey and I knew about this game when we were 7 and 9 years old, oh man, we would have played this nonstop and Casey would have been unbeatable.
Yeah. Well, I can still imagine. I think Casey would be unbeatable at this game. However, this is going to be my new pool party game.
This sounds so much fun.
This rules.
I'm playing this immediately.
We're playing Hakamoa next time we see each other.
Yes.
Well, thank you for playing my game. So let's head into our conclusions, starting with our Rosebud and Thorn. Kira, what are your Rosebud and Thorns for this episode?
My rose, I'm going to do an early rose this season for the editing, specifically for showing the 2 teams guess what the other team is going to do and then immediately cut to the other team not doing that or doing that. And I think this is going to happen a lot this season, but I just think what a wonderful way to start. Just so tension-filled and great. My Thorn is that as our resident Team Ben member, I was a little bummed that Ben didn't perform a miracle and win at Tuho. I thought that maybe he would pull it out of his back pocket, but either way, I thought it was a valiant effort. And my Bud is, I wonder if Ben and Adam are going to have the strategy as blockers where they kind of play it more fast and loose with roadblocks and try to just block lots of different routes. And if they do choose to do that, I am so excited to see whether it works.
Casey, what about you? What's your Rosebud and Thorn?
My rose is that after many seasons of bad luck, I loved the moment where Sam manifested pulling a battle challenge from the deck.
So
you could tell that he confidently deceived even himself into thinking that it was a certainty. And so seeing him and Adam be so gleeful when it worked out was just awesome. My Thorn is that I would have actually liked to see Adam and Sam float a birthday boat with their failed challenge, but alas, fences, they couldn't trespass into that water. And my Bud is that I thought this was such a fun first episode, and I'm really excited to see more of the game as the players learn about the strategies and start to play more confidently and aggressively.
Ooh, me too, especially after our discussion about confidence in play.
Yes.
Oh, I'm so excited for that now. My rose is Ben's GS25 store tour for his mom was A, delightful. I love when moms are good and we love them. And B, so fun to watch. I love seeing like the mundane little things in a country. For example, what snacks do they have? Yeah. And so I really enjoyed that store tour. My thorn is that I feel like oftentimes Adam and Sam are probably the weakest duo in round robin seasons in that they sort of lose all common sense because they both get so anxious and they feed off of each other and convince each other out of the completely regular thing to do, which I think sometimes makes Ben even more powerful during his runs, and that makes me very nervous because I would like Adam to win. And my Bud, I loved how Ben just kept nerfing himself by taking worse routes because he was afraid the blockers would be on the better route even when they weren't. And I'm really excited to see if this sort of psychology continuing means that runs in general are just going to be worse than we originally predicted, or if they're going to get over it.
So true. I'm also going to chime in with a second Bud, which is that this week we saw the first hint of season 15, which is looking like it's an all-star season with Toby, Michelle, and Brian all as guests, and I am so excited!
And with that, thank you for waiting at Baggage Claim. Let us know your thoughts on socials at baggageclaimpod or over email, which is in the episode description. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a comment or give us a follow. We'll see you next time at the Pika Clone Baggage Claim. Weirdly, there's a Plusle and a Minun dancing around this one, and you're gonna need to dodge their electric blast while grabbing your suitcase. Goodbye!
Bye!
Bye.
We've been talking about Minecraft.
Chicken jockey. I'm one
Is
with
that
the kids.
did that come from Minecraft?
What?
Apparently kids would like shout chicken jockey at the Minecraft movie. I know about this because I read about it in the New York Times, okay?
You're so hip with the kids.
I'm so hip with the kids. I read New York Times articles about the Minecraft movie.